The Pirates of the Caribbean films could very easily be described as bipolar. The first movie, while there was some amount of jank to it, was still good for the most part. Then 2 sequels were added on, and while there was certainly more wonkiness to them, there was still some enjoyment to be found in them. But then 2 more sequels were created, and these were clearly subpar in quality to those that had come before. So much so that no installments have been created since, with Dead Men Tell No Tales having been released 9 years ago. So, let's examine the last of these films to see where it went wrong. Please note that I will be limited to stills in this video, as copyright bots will be all over me if I show footage. I apologize for that. We open up with a figure pacing about a room with notes and information pinned to a wall. I will say that this is a bit odd, as the time period that this is based on is long before we had things like the internet, where you can just look up information whenever you please. This is a fictional version of the 1700s, which means that this character would have to find the book or pamphlet which contained this information, or rely on hearsay from others. Learning about the supernatural made a bit more sense for characters like Jack or Beckett, who would have been able to travel the world at will or have the assistance of a nation's government respectively. But as we'll see in a moment, this character is a child. His notes indicate Father's Curse, which we'll find out about in a moment. This kid takes a rowboat a distance off the shore, which the bottom may fall off of quite quickly considering he came from a lighthouse on a rocky outcropping, and proceeds to throw himself into the depths, weighing himself down with rocks. A little bit insane if taken at face value, but we quickly witness why this youth did so, as a ship rises from the deep and brings him back to the surface. But this isn't just any ship, it's the Flying Dutchman, of which Will Turner was made captain of at the end of the 3rd film. Will Turner himself abruptly confronts the child, whom is in fact his own son, Henry Turner, who wanted to see him. Henry claims that he will find the Trident of Poseidon, which has the power to break any curse of the sea. Okay, let's stop for a moment to recap. For those needing a refresher, Will Turner here was made captain of the Flying Dutchman to save his life, after the previous captain, Davy Jones, had mortally wounded him. Jack Sparrow took Will by the hand and stabbed Davy Jones's disembodied heart, killing him, but whoever kills the previous captain takes his place. That means that Will now suffers Davy Jones's curse of having to ferry the souls of those who died at sea to the afterlife, getting 1 day every 10 years to spend on land. This curse was set by Calypso, a goddess of the sea. So this Trident of Poseidon apparently supersedes her somehow. But let us also question for a moment why the Dutchman and Will look the way that they do. Davy Jones, his crew, and the Dutchman took on the appearance of sea creatures because he actively chose to ignore his duty of ferrying the dead. When Will became captain, the Dutchman was restored to a proper ship rather than its overgrown and rotten appearance, and the crew became human again. So why, with Will having been performing his duty, does he have barnacles growing on him, and the ship appearing cursed again as though he was ignoring his responsibility? On top of that, he urges Henry to get off the ship, citing that the crew know he's here. You are the captain. They answer to you. Davy Jones had no trouble controlling them. This sets a precedent that the creators of this film only have a passing knowledge of the previous ones. But we'll get to that as we go. Will dismisses the trident as just a tale, but Henry counters, just like the tales of you and Jack Sparrow. This prompts Will to snap that he must never find Jack Sparrow and to leave the sea forever. Given that Jack is a character that almost always prioritizes himself over others, this is good advice. He's not evil, but he does look out for himself most of the time. The Dutchman makes to descend again, and Will apologizes to his son, stating that his curse will never be broken, and that he must forget about him. That's got to be heartbreaking, as any good parent will want to take care of their kids. And Will clearly regrets that he can't be there for his son. Henry, returning to the dinghy, is undaunted, however, and mutters, "Captain Jack Sparrow. I suppose if anyone could find a mythical treasure, it would be him." We then cut to 9 years later, with an English ship chasing down a pirate vessel, with an older Henry trying to discern if this is a ship that may be captained by Jack. And a crewmate tells him to get back to work, citing, "You don't want to get kicked off another ship." This tells us that Henry is only using this as a means to track pirates, rather than any service to the British Empire. But he pays his crewmate no heed, becoming alarmed at the rocky pass that lies ahead. Henry shoves aside the officer ordering him back to his post, and shouts to the captain that they're sailing into the Devil's Triangle. The captain dismisses him, but Henry declares that ships that go into the triangle don't necessarily, but then he's cut off. Don't necessarily. This would indicate that some ships have made it through this pass, which would run counter to what we'll soon see. Henry won't be dissuaded though, and tries to overtake the crew to steer the ship away, though he is promptly subdued. The captain declares that his actions are treasonous and tears Henry's sleeves at the shoulders. Not particularly sturdy, this garment. Henry is then thrown in the brig while they keep chase. Oddly, the brig contains numerous wanted flyers for Jack Sparrow. Why these are on this ship, I can't say. Did Henry bring them? If so, why would there be so many, and why would they be on the floor of the brig? As the British pass into the triangle, they spy the ship of the pirates they were pursuing has already been destroyed, as that wreckage is fresh. However, the silhouette of another vessel is making straight for them, and shadowy figures run across the surface of the water to board them. The Brits are swiftly overwhelmed, and the captain of these ghostly men finds his way down to the brig, where he confronts Henry. He pauses when he notices the wanted posters for Jack, and mutters his name. Now, I know this is going to upset some people, and I have no ill will towards the actor of Salazar here, the leader of these undead, but his accent is incredibly strong. And when he says Sparrow, the S is quite muted while the R's are rolled. This only becomes more pronounced as the film goes on, with him only saying Paro by the end of the movie. It gets old after a while. Salazar allows Henry to live, as he states that he always leaves one man alive to tell the tale of what happened, and that he wants Henry to deliver a message to Jack, as Henry does confirm that he's seeking the pirate. Salazar declares that the triangle has cursed him and his crew, though why that doesn't appear to have affected any other ship is unknown. Shouldn't the pirates and the British be cursed as well? But Salazar declares that the only way that they can escape is Jack Sparrow's compass, and tells Henry to inform Jack that he will escape this place, and that when he does, death will come straight for him. Okay, so why would you tell the messenger the only way to release you? What reason would he have to help you once you let him go? There's even the forced reference to the name of the film, with Salazar declaring that, "I wish I could do it myself, but dead men tell no tales." A bit forced, huh? We then shift to a prison where a woman named Karina Smith is being accused of being a witch, though she soon escapes via picking the lock and knocking over the official. We'll get to her in a bit. We then have an extended sequence reintroducing Jack Sparrow himself. Sorry, Captain Jack Sparrow, though unfortunately the Jack we'll see in this film has been neutered. In the prior films, Jack was crafty, and while he would occasionally plan things ahead, he more so acted quickly on his feet in the moment. This Jack is washed up and inept. He's shown having passed out from inside the vault he intends to steal, and doesn't remember what he was there for. We then have an extended sequence where a grand total of 12 horses rip a building off its foundation and drag it through town, with Jack bumbling around after it. The Pirates films definitely took liberties with physics, sure, but never quite like this. There was always some means of seeing how the more ridiculous stunts worked, even if you knew that they would never do so in real life. This is much more difficult to believe. During this, Karina decides to, for some reason while she's on the run, head into a shop and adjust a large telescope that is here for an undetermined purpose, portraying her as extremely competent, while the shop owner is a buffoon who repeatedly screams that she's a witch. I know most people here are sick of hearing about Mary Sue's, but I would not say that Karina is one. No, it's more that she simply has a horrible "I'm smarter than everyone" attitude that most Mary Sue's possess. It doesn't help that most of the characters in this film have been made stupid, including returning characters that absolutely should not be. She states that she needs a chronometer, while gloating that she's cataloged over 200 stars, all while the shop owner is losing his mind, and Jack stumbles in as well, when he should be getting after the vault that he's trying to steal. The bank then passes by, not sure how it doubled back to be here, tearing the shop apart in the process. Jack and Karina make a break for it, though Jack throws Karina off of a roof and into a cart to distract the guards. Upon getting away with the vault, though, only one coin is left inside after their escapade, and all of Jack's ragtag crew leave him, including Gibbs and the dwarf. I don't like traitors. Considering all Jack and Gibbs have gone through, this is character assassination for both of them. Gibbs, you deserve a brick applied to your cranium with excessive velocity. Though one of the pirates stated that Barbossa has a fleet of 10 ships. That will come up in a bit. Jack then draws his compass, which points to what the holder wants most, and it directs him towards the sea, and he wistfully places the Black Pearl, shrunken and put in a bottle by Blackbeard in the last film, on the stern of this ship in dry dock, clearly remembering better days. Henry has apparently arrived in this same town, though, and the narration by the officer declares that he washed up here on wreckage. He was identified as a traitor by his torn sleeves, though, and has been chained here, awaiting execution. Karina has been willed here by the plot, though, and has disguised herself as a member of the church, and has decided that Henry can help her because in his sleep he mumbled about the trident, which she apparently believes in while simultaneously denying the existence of the supernatural, which we have seen many times in this series. She states that the map that leads to it, which Henry declares has never been seen or read by any man, is in the stars and can only be read during a blood moon, which will happen shortly. Problem though, the outline for this map is in the journal that Karina possesses, which was written by Galileo, who was, in fact, a man. This means that it was both read and seen by a man, so Karina's comment of "luckily I'm a woman" is off by magnitudes. When Éowyn in The Lord of the Rings used a similar line, it was clever. It was playing off of when Glorfindel discerned that the Witch King would not be killed by any man, and that was taken to mean the race of men, and was a play on words. This is just a blatant attempt to make Karina appear to be special when she is no such thing. Moving on, Karina declares that this journal was left to her by her father, and that is why she's spent so much of her life studying the stars. Karina frees Henry just as several redcoats arrive, who have apparently discovered her somehow, being able to discern which woman she is here out of around a dozen without seeing her face. She is captured, but Henry escapes. Jack is now shuffling openly through the town now, which is strange, as he should be apprehended on sight, as he was seen plainly as he stole the vault. He does clumsily hop a fence to avoid some redcoats, but they're absolutely oblivious. Jack even sees wanted posters of himself on the wall of a tavern he stops into, so it's not like he isn't recognized. He requests a drink from the tavern keeper, though he doesn't have any money on him, and instead opts to trade his compass. This releases Salazar and his crew, and causes the Devil's Triangle to crumble completely for some reason, but doesn't remove their curse. Strange, that is. The compass was given to Jack by Tia Dalma, who was Calypso in human form. It has no connection to this curse, and its origin has been retconned in this film, which I'm never a fan of, and is entirely nonsensical. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Henry catches sight of Jack as he leaves the tavern, but Jack is swiftly captured by the Brits though, who only seem to be competent when an officer or official is present. We then have a brief sequence depicting Salazar's ship destroying a small pirate vessel, though this is largely inconsequential to the narrative. In her cell, Karina witnesses the blood moon, which causes the ruby on the cover of the journal to light up, and reveals the text on its cover that reads, "To release the power of the sea, one must divide." And it shows her that the stars lead to an island. Henry, though, has disguised himself as a redcoat and sneaks into the dungeon to look for Jack. He finds him, though is in disbelief, stating that the great Jack Sparrow is not some drunk in a cell. Too right. Jack's character was butchered in this film. Jack is supposed to be witty, clever, and capable. This bumbling idiot just wears his face. Jack then demands to know who Henry is, and is visibly shaken by the name, recalling Will and Elizabeth from the first 3 films. Henry declares that if they find the trident, then Jack can retake everything he's lost, though Jack dismisses him. In response, Henry delivers the message from Salazar, though this does distress Jack. We then shift to Barbossa's flagship, where the 2 former Redcoats / East India soldiers from the first and third films bicker over who will deliver tidings to the captain himself. Odd that these 2 show up. Though none of these characters are ever properly named in the films themselves, Barbossa always had Pintel and Rigetti, who were the counterparts to these 2, who are named Murtaugh and Mulroy. The duo report to Barbossa that 3 of Barbossa's ships have already been sunken by an enemy that takes no prisoners and makes no demands, leaving 1 man alive to tell the tale. While the pair struggle to remember the name of the captain of the attacker, they come close enough for Barbossa to discern that it is Salazar. Also, I miss when Barbossa had his distinct look from the first 3 films. This Barbossa is, in my subjective opinion, much less special looking. I'd also like to point out that his major point in the third film was that he wanted to be free to plunder as he wished, but then instantly turned into being a privateer for the British in the 4th movie. So the writers have struggled with him for some time. Barbossa then makes his way to the same prison we've seen before. Crazy how this seems to be the only one, and bribes the guards to see an actual witch that is locked up here, who has has not been executed. Oddly enough, Barbossa somewhat explains this by declaring that he saved her from the gallows when the witch demands payment, and she announces that the dead seek Jack, who will sail for the Trident. She also reveals that the dead can't set foot on land, which feels like the writers just copied and pasted Davy Jones's stipulation onto these characters just for the sake of it. Barbossa hastily scoffs at the notion of living on land on a farm, and the witch asks him if his treasure is worth dying for. Barbossa then asks how he can save himself, and the witch tells him that the compass that Jack had given away releases the holder's greatest fear. Pardon? That was never part of it. The witch has somehow acquired the compass and gives it to Barbossa, saying that by leading Salazar to Jack, that he will be spared. It's always a hallmark of a well-written work when characters or items can simply appear when needed when that should logically be impossible. Note my sarcasm. Morning comes though, and Jack and Karina are due to be executed, with the former by guillotine and the latter by hanging. Karina then screams at the crowd to quiet down, and for some reason, they do. This really doesn't help the character's insufferable image. She begins to prattle on, and thankfully Jack cuts her off, with the two having a back and forth of insulting each other. Henry then attempts to make an entrance, swinging in via a rope, but is promptly subdued, as he doesn't even have a weapon. The officer demands to know if Henry thought he could defeat the soldiers, but Henry remarks that he was just the distraction, and Gibbs and the others fire a small cannon, partially destroying the gallows that Jack is on, though this fails to release him. One of the pirates then tries to free Karina, though he tries to deliver a kick to the hangman and simply flops to the floor instead. Exasperated, Karina then delivers the piddliest of shin kicks to the hangman, who then falls off the gallows. Again, this makes this character seem like the writers are trying to make her seem special, when in reality, they are simply inept. There is not an ice cube's chance in the Sahara that such a tiny shin kick would make this hangman flop over like his skeleton was reduced to tissue paper. Gibbs then tells Jack that Henry gave them 10 silver coins to rescue him, and I have to wonder where Henry got the coin. Still, Gibbs is a traitor and still needs that brick to his skull. A sequence follows, and our main cast escape back to Jack's docked ship. Jack has elected to take Henry and Karina prisoner, lashing them to the mast while he launches the ship, called the Dying Gull, though it gets snagged for a moment, throwing them all to the deck. Then they fall again in the other direction as it frees itself. Like my writing debugging video on tone discussed, we need some moments to be serious. This just makes the scene drag on for no payoff. Barbossa, though, has decided to seek Salazar out, and as the latter's ship approaches his, it opens up, with its timbers acting like jaws. I know it's subjective, but the skeletal frames of a ship don't strike me as intimidating, like the previously fog-shrouded Black Pearl of the first film, or the overgrown Flying Dutchman of 2 and 3. Also, this curse of Salazar's just seems to do what it wants. He and his crew were cursed, but no one else who entered the Triangle was, and it turned their ship into this thing. The curses of the first 3 films were all explained quite well, but not this one. Why does it even exist? Barbossa calls out that he knows Salazar is seeking Jack, though, which gives the Spanish captain pause. Salazar declares that Barbossa needs to speak quickly, as every time he taps his sword on the deck, one of his men will kill one of Barbossa's, and so he begins to tap it rather quickly. Barbossa replies by saying that Jack is making for the Trident, and that only Barbossa can lead him there, and that he will have Jack's head by sunrise, staking his life on it. Salazar accepts and taps his sword 5 more times, leading to a total of 8 deaths of Barbossa's crew. Cutting back to the Dying Gull, Henry insists that Karina should tell Jack about how to get to the Trident, as it's only a matter of time before Salazar finds them. She rudely dismisses him, though, being as unbearable as she usually is. Jack approaches, however, demanding the map. Karina refuses, saying that it doesn't exist yet. Well, obviously it does in some form, as Galileo made this journal. Jack then threatens to kill Henry if she refuses, which she does, stating that Jack is bluffing. He claims that he'll keel-haul Henry. For those unaware, keel-hauling was when a rope was tied to an unfortunate individual who was then thrown overboard, and would most often die, either from drowning or the lacerations of barnacles underneath the ship. Those things are sharper than you would think. The problem here, though, is that this lot are about to throw Henry off the back of the ship, or the stern. This would mean that he would simply be stuck in the water behind the ship, rather than being raked across it. You would need to throw him off the front of the ship, or the bow. Henry is then gagged and tossed off the back of the ship, and Karina insists that the map is in the stars and that she can't read it until night falls. It's then revealed that Henry was thrown into the dinghy that is just tied off to the side of the vessel and in the water for some reason. I did question this during the establishing shot, but back on the shore, the British officer from earlier has Barbossa's witch drawn from her cell and declares that she is going to tell him what's going on. Given the ultimatum of helping the British or being killed, the witch tells him about the stars and gives him a heading. We are burning through these scenes, though. As night falls, Karina is charting the stars, and Henry declares that Jack is doing nothing while the dead are hunting them. Henry, out of sheer agitation from Jack's flippant response, seizes a sword from nearby, but Jack points a flintlock at him. I will give that this moment echoed a bit of Will and Jack's first meeting. A nice touch, but not enough to save this film. Nostalgia alone does not a good movie make. At least that's assuming that you have some standards for your films. I feel so sorry for Star Wars fans. Disney has done them so dirty. Henry then speaks with Karina, asking her about the journal. She states that it's the only link to who she's supposed to be, as she never knew her parents, and her father supposedly left it with her. Henry remarks that they're both chasing their fathers then, making them closer than she would think. Back on Barbossa's ship, Salazar has become impatient as the sun has begun to rise, and they have not yet found Jack. He orders one of his men to kill Barbossa, but the latter replies that the sun isn't all the way up yet, which was part of their deal, citing Salazar's honor. Salazar then snaps that Barbossa knows nothing of him, and he indulges in his own backstory. Salazar was part of the Spanish forces and had made it his goal to eradicate piracy, as his father and grandfather had been killed by pirates. He declares that the last pirates had joined together to fight him, which has to be false considering the fact that the previous films exist. There's no way that there had been any shortage of pirates, and it had been Beckett's goal to accomplish this in the first place, bringing the seas under the control of the British. We also get the name of Salazar's ship, the Silent Mary, but the pirate captain is mortally wounded by cannon shot, and he bequeaths the compass to Jack, which is again not how Jack got his compass. Salazar then recounts that it was then that he beheld a young Jack in the crow's nest, saying that he stood there like a little bird. From that day he earned himself a name that would haunt me for the rest of my days. Jack the Sparrow. Hold the phone. You're expecting me to believe that Jack got his name from a Spanish officer who then got cursed to remain in that passage, and thus nobody would have heard this account. Shove off with that. Jack mocks Salazar, who then gives chase. Jack orders his crew to latch their anchor onto a rock before they enter the Devil's Triangle, but Salazar in his larger ship cannot pull off the same maneuver, and they proceed into it. The Silent Mary then proceeds to be rocked with explosions from somewhere, and the crew are then cursed. Why didn't this happen to the pirates or the Brits, I wonder? But Jack's crew then proceed to give him offerings of theirs, which are various bits of his attire. Why do movies these days keep doing this? They keep trying to explain things that did not need it, while simultaneously retconning stories. Jack's effects, including his hat, were just that. We don't need every item to have a backstory. Things can simply be things. This is like that Han Solo movie trying to explain every little detail and just made things worse. But as Salazar is about to kill Barbossa, the latter points to the horizon, declaring that he has upheld his end of their bargain with Jack's ship ahead. Strangely though, we cut to around midday on the Dying Gull, and none of them have noticed Barbossa's ship, which was within visual range just hours ago. On board, Karina is once again going on about how she can read the stars to find an island that the others claim doesn't exist. There's an extended bit where the others mistake horology for her being a lady of the night, but finally they notice their enemies. It only took them hours. The crew want to kill Jack for their situation, including Gibbs. Again, apply brick. Jack counters this by stating that if he's dead, then Salazar can't have his revenge, and that he will be even more enraged towards them. Jack then takes to the dinghy with Henry and Karina, the latter of whom is incessantly denying the existence of the cursed undead chasing Jack, before she decides to doff her dress and swim for it, citing that Jack is the target and that he is on this boat. This is seen by Salazar, however, and his crew drops a trio of sharks who also seem to be cursed as they are. Why do they have these? How do they have these? Regardless, there is an extended sequence in which these sharks are made to pursue Jack, and for some reason they obey Salazar. Why though? Davy Jones had the Kraken, but he was almost a demigod made by Calypso. That made sense. These do not. One point I will note is that at one point Henry actually falls overboard and Jack actually calls out his name and saves him, which is a brief showing of the real Jack. Remember, Jack isn't really good or evil. He's mostly out for himself, but he does care about select individuals, even if he doesn't show it. With Henry being the son of Will and Elizabeth, I believe that he would care about him, given everything he went through with Henry's parents. But Salazar isn't impressed by the sharks taking so long to kill Jack, and so he and his crew make after them, running across the surface of the water. Henry distracts the sharks by tossing Karina's dress in and swimming for it when they react to it hitting the water. But Jack gets his foot stuck in a hole in the boat. By sheer luck, Jack lodges the dinghy's anchor into one of the sharks, which then decides to make a beeline for the shore, landing him upon it. He even snags up Henry on the way. The Spanish eye Jack from the shallows, but one gets too close to the shore and dissolves as the water recedes. This just felt like the writers were aping off of Davy Jones's curse. The curse of the Devil's Triangle is never explained, unlike those of the previous films. Karina then screams, "Ghosts," and runs inland like a complete buffoon, with Henry giving chase. Your primary characters behaving like idiots is not a good sign for your writing. Salazar ominously tells Jack that he will be waiting for him, as the latter hastens off after Karina and Henry. I mean, with what we see of this landmass, Jack could theoretically live the rest of his days here. It can support a population, as we'll see, which means that Salazar would never be able to get his revenge. Karina is still running blindly into the trees like an imbecile and is soon caught in a net trap. Well, that certainly can't be a natural formation. Someone made it, so it must have a purpose. Another short sequence shows us that the British have reached the area and have taken Gibbs and the others. Not really much to say about this, as these characters have largely fallen out of the plot now. Jack and Henry are searching for Karina, though, and come across a sign declaring this to be Hangman Bay, strangers not welcome. Well, that explains the net, though this would imply that people semi-regularly land on that beach. The pair soon find Karina, though they're caught as well. And we continue with these rapid-fire jump cuts between scenes, with Salazar having strung up Barbossa and his crew, executing them, declaring that Barbossa didn't fulfill his part of their deal. I would like to point out that he did. You just failed to execute your plan, Salazar. I will say that Salazar is much less intimidating of a villain than the others. Barbossa in the first film was devious and clever. Davy Jones, while occasionally letting his temper get the better of him, was still mentally sound enough to take steps against Jack and the others. Salazar is a strange combination of violence with attempted comedic relief. This doesn't do him any favors, it just makes him appear inept. He'll rave 1 minute, bungle his actions the next, then go back to lashing out. Barbossa counters that Jack is on land and he can't escape, though this doesn't seem to dissuade Salazar. Cutting back to Jack and the others, they are found by the inhabitants, who take them captive. Barbossa then promises Salazar that if he spares him and his crew, that he will deliver Jack to him. I remember when Barbossa was fearsome. Now he's a groveling weakling. Following this, we have a scene that really overstays its welcome. Jack apparently owes one of the higher-ups of this island, which he hasn't paid up. To compensate, this fellow is going to marry Jack off to his sister. The scene drags on, with it playing up how disgusting and repulsive these characters are. This sequence adds nothing to the narrative, though eventually it's interrupted by the arrival of Barbossa, who kills a few of these would-be wedding-goers and announces to his crew that he will not, in fact, be handing Jack over, as he wishes the trident for himself, so that he may kill Salazar and take back the seas for his own. Using Blackbeard's sword that he took in the last film, he breaks the bottle that the Black Pearl is housed within, and as Jack hastily carries it towards the sea, it grows in size, though still a miniature ship. While Jack is confused, Barbossa exclaims, "She needs the sea," and tosses the ship into the water, where it continues to grow to its former size. This does take a moment though, and it briefly appears as though the pearl is gone forever, to which Jack says, "She was a fine ship." The Black Pearl was Jack's most treasured possession. It represented his entire life to him. Jack shouldn't have such a one-and-done line about the notion of losing it forever, even if it was shrunken. Barbossa then threatens Jack, stating that he will be the captain of this ship. I get that they're playing off of Jack and Barbossa's vicious back and forth over captaincy of the Pearl, but now is not the time. Especially seeing as you wanted him alive. Jack, Henry, and Karina are restrained, though the latter insists to Barbossa that she can read the map and find the trident. Barbossa and his crew object, claiming that no island exists where she claims, but Henry implores them to listen to her. Barbossa eventually decides to have Karina released, and in this sequence, we do see Gibbs and the others escape. Unfortunately, Henry and Karina have another exchange, with Karina refusing to acknowledge that she was wrong when she called him insane for believing in curses and the like, after she has seen the supernatural right before her eyes. Do you understand why this character is loathsome? Barbossa notices the journal that Karina keeps, and when she informs him that it was left to her by her father, he makes the realization that she is in fact his child that he abandoned. Now, considering that Karina and Henry are of a similar age, this would mean that Barbossa had to father her around the same time as Will and Elizabeth conceived Henry. Given his privateering escapades and issues with Blackbeard, I'm uncertain as to when he would have found the time. Jack then mocks Barbossa, subtly revealing that he's figured this out as well, and questions Barbossa about what happened. Barbossa claims that he left the infant on the steps of the orphanage with the journal, as it had a ruby in its cover that he hoped she'd be able to sell to get by. Jack then tries to use the threat of revealing this to Karina to get Barbossa to free him, but Barbossa claims that she would never believe him, and leaves him tied up. The crew notice the redcoats preparing to fire upon them though, but their vessel is swiftly destroyed by the Silent Mary. Really, the purpose of the British in this film was next to nil after Jack escaped them. A battle ensues, and oddly enough, even the figurehead of the Silent Mary tries to kill Jack. I would love to know how the curse of the Devil's Triangle works, or why it exists. Karina does find a rocky outcropping though, and the Black Pearl runs aground on it, with Salazar and his crew scrambling to get back to the Silent Mary, as a few dissolve, with the Pearl being aground, seemingly counting as land. Salazar does abduct Henry though, and we don't get a great look at how he did so that's not exactly ideal. As the sun rises, the crew behold that this island is covered in gemstones, with several large rubies matching the positions of the large stars detailed in Galileo's journal. Upon finding that one of these isn't glowing like the others, Barbossa gives Karina the ruby that was on the cover of the journal, and when she places it into the missing chunk of the larger gem, a fissure opens up and the water pulls aside, which Jack and Karina fall into. They slide down rocks, which should be covered in barnacles, oysters, and other nastiness that would shred you to pieces in real life. But thankfully for our characters, it's just smooth rock. Karina drops the journal, but Jack pockets it. Remember that. On the Silent Mary, we have yet another bizarre instance of Salazar's curse, where he's insisting that he must possess Henry as Jack is technically on land, and thus he cannot pursue. One of his men then warns that he cannot unpossess Henry, to which Salazar remarks that the trident will save him. Excuse me, what? How can you possess someone? How did you find out you could do that? How do you know that you cannot undo it? Logically, this would mean that one of you tried this before on someone, but that's never mentioned. And it seems like that would have been a great way to leave the Devil's Triangle. Jack and Karina discover the trident of Poseidon itself, but are swiftly ambushed by a possessed Henry, and Salazar's crew wait behind the wall of water, and apparently they can somehow choose whether to stand atop it or sink. Jack tries to avoid Henry, as he soon discovers what's transpired, while Karina eventually dislodges the trident, though it is taken by Salazar, who then discards Henry. Though oddly enough, you are standing on land, which should dissolve you as your curse still seems to be in full effect. With the trident, Salazar is somehow able to blast Jack around with immense jets of water, which really should have killed him as he gets slammed into rocks with tremendous force. Karina does manage to resuscitate Henry, who makes the connection to the words written in the journal about, to release the power of the sea, all must divide, meaning that breaking the trident will also break all the curses. Salazar then attempts to skewer Jack, though the trident fails to penetrate the journal. Is this Rush Hour 2, where Carter is saved from being stabbed by the wad of cash he picked up earlier? Jack takes hold of the trident, though, preventing Salazar from snatching it away as Henry shatters it. Well, let's just hope that nobody gets cursed from this point onward, as this won't be available in the future. Salazar and his men begin to revert to their human forms, staggering out of the water and gasping for air. Unfortunately for everyone here, though, the water slowly begins to flow back to its original position, which is a great way for these newly cured Spaniards and our cast to drown. Barbossa has returned to the Black Pearl, though, and has had the crew drop the anchor into the trench, looking to save the others. How did they get it free of the rocks? Jack, Henry, and Karina manage to grab a hold of the anchor and begin to climb the chain, but Salazar and a few of his men do as well. The chain catches briefly on an outcrop of rock, causing Karina to fall, but she's saved by Barbossa. However, Barbossa had apparently tattooed the constellation in Galileo's journal on his arm at some point, even though he had clearly dismissed it earlier. Karina sees this and makes the connection of him being her father. In a rather forced reference to Barbossa's meeting with the witch, Karina asks who she is to Barbossa, and he replies, "Treasure. I have removed my glasses and I am massaging my eyes now." Really with this? We're coming in at the 11th hour trying to portray Barbossa of all people as sentimental. Salazar is just below though, and Jack calls out to Barbossa using his first name of Hector. It's an interesting point that I will give the film, as the two characters have been allies and enemies many times throughout the films. But this will be the last, it would seem. Jack drops Henry's sword to Barbossa, who elects to let go of the anchor chain to plunge towards Salazar, stabbing it into him and taking both himself and Salazar out in the process, plunging into the depths. Jack, Henry, and Karina are hauled up though, and this one guy here looks quite a bit like Teague, Jack's father, who was seen briefly in the prior films. I wonder if they had intended him to come into play at some point in this movie. The crew briefly mourn Barbossa, and Jack surreptitiously passes Henry the journal. Henry questions Karina if she's okay, but she doesn't yet know how to process what happened. Granted, it would be something to realize that someone like Barbossa was your father, only for him to sacrifice himself seconds later. Might take a minute to process that one. Henry returns the journal to her, however, calling her Miss Smith, though she declares that her name is Barbossa. Tad forced there. We then shift back to the lighthouse island from the beginning of the film, where Henry and Karina share some clunky dialogue about how Karina was wrong about curses before sharing a kiss. And their story is truly just a rushed and inferior version of Will and Elizabeth's romance from the first three films. These two haven't known each other all that long, or interacted all that much. But Henry spies the Flying Dutchman, and Will soon approaches. I have several questions though. If nobody is ferrying the souls of the dead to the afterlife now, what happens to them? For that matter, who did this before Davy Jones, whom Will replaced? And the Dutchman is most frequently either underwater or in the realm beyond the living. How did Will get it here if the curse was broken? And why are the crew listening to him now when they clearly wouldn't have before when they were a threat to young Henry? And shouldn't Will be dead if the curse was spontaneously lifted? His heart's in a box, which means that if the curse breaks, it's not keeping him alive. Will questions how Henry could have broken the curse, but Elizabeth arrives over the hill, and the pair embrace each other. While they have no lines, this does get a bit of a reaction out of me. Remember that Will has been cursed for over 2 decades now, and Elizabeth has still been faithful. In today's world, you don't have to look far to find people who will use any excuse to commit infidelity on their partner. Elizabeth is to be lauded. Henry and Karina are seen holding hands, but get off my screen, this isn't about you. The film concludes with Jack witnessing this through his spyglass, claiming, "What a truly revolting sight." Some have said that this is out of character, but I don't believe that he was being serious with this line. Remember that Jack was willing to accept the curse of being the Dutchman's captain for the immortality, but he gave it up to save Will's life. He does care about these two. I will give the ending this. It does stick to what these films are supposed to be, with Gibbs asking what their heading is, and Jack replying that he has a rendezvous beyond my beloved horizon, and the Black Pearl sails off into the sunset. But wait, there's more! As was the style at the time, much to my chagrin, there is a post-credits scene. Will and Elizabeth are asleep for the night, and it is thundering outside. Loud footsteps can be heard beyond their door, which soon opens to reveal the shadow of an all-too-familiar previous antagonist approaching them. And Will snaps awake as we get a shot of Davy Jones's crab claw hand, only to find that in reality, nothing was there. Breathing a sigh of relief, he wraps his arms around Elizabeth, but the camera pans down to the floor, showing us a few barnacles in a wet patch, indicating that things may have been more real than they appeared. What? Davy Jones rather conclusively died. That's how Will became the cursed captain of the Flying Dutchman in the first place. How and why would he be back? And be here of all places? And he's not supposed to be able to set foot on land except once a decade. So this is a remarkably small window of time if he was here. And why is Davy Jones in his cursed form if all curses were broken? Calypso, you've got some splainin' to do. Truly, this is sequel bait that never panned out. So, how would I score this film? Well, objectively, this would probably get around a 6. Remember that this film does not stand on its own. It's the 5th one in a series, and as such, it has to respect canon, which it does not. There are numerous retcons, such as how the Dutchman's curse works, or the compass itself. It mostly stays true to its own narrative, but that does not fit within the larger established one. Subjectively, I would give this a 4. It spits on characters like Jack and Barbossa, while insisting that we should like Karina, who was an incessant brat. Henry's role shrivels into almost nothing as the movie goes on, and so the romance between him and Karina feels insubstantial at best. Calypso should have had something to say about the system she put in place being dismantled, and if you're going to break all curses, why not go for broke and pull out some old ones? Imagine if instead of being a sniveling coward, Barbossa had found a way to snatch another piece of Aztec gold from the sunken Isla de Muerta of the first film and fought Salazar as another immortal. The curse of the Devil's Triangle was also mostly a mishmash of Davy Jones's curse and the Aztec gold curse as well. Still, the Pirates of the Caribbean films will always have a soft spot in my heart. Mostly the first 3 though. 4 was so dull that I forgot most of it, and this one was simply not good. The first movie was mostly well done, 2 was entertaining, and 3 was a mixed bag. But these writers clearly didn't know how they were going to do this film, or respect the ones that came before. And it shows. But what did you think of this movie or the Pirates films in general? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Leave a like on this video if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. I would like to thank you for watching, and may you all have a weapon in each hand.